Okay, this is talking back to controlling images, Latinos changing responses to racism over the life course. From Race, Class, and Gender, 10th edition. Okay, so the reading starts off with Trump slithering down from the escalator to say some horrible racist attacks against Mexicans and Mexican Americans. And so Trump's infamous now speech announcing his campaign connects to this research article because his speech disseminated a controlling image of Mexicans as criminals. So controlling images are ideological justifications of oppression that are central to the reproduction of racial, class, and gender inequality. Controlling images are major instruments of power. So the function of controlling images is to dehumanize and control dominated groups as defined by Patricia Hill Collins. The social institutions that circulate controlling images do so to suppress less privileged groups, restricting minorities' access to upward mobility, self-efficacy, and the power of self-definition. Controlling images are a hallmark of systemic racism, justifying the creation, development, and maintenance of white privilege, economic wealth, and sociopolitical power, which is rooted in hierarchies and dominance. So they argue that it's different from, but related to prejudice. It's different from prejudice as it's an ideological collective representation. While prejudice does involve negative emotion and stereotypes, so that connects it to controlling images. But controlling images are systemic and cultural, and they are related to those other cultural tools for what Swindler calls strategies of action, such as racism, prejudice, and discrimination. So their methods for their research study looked at 62 in-depth history interviews with Latino men, some of which covering decades of their lives, looking at how controlling images connected to their stage in the life course. So their findings. While the most prominent finding was that age shapes resistance strategies. They found that youth used emotional tactics while older men used leadership techniques to resist. So when it comes to this idea of being forcibly constrained, when controlling images are effective, they limit opportunities and they add constraints and can even channel emotional responses. When interviewees were reflecting on their youth, the Latino men recalled feeling constrained by imagery that depicted them as athletic bodies lacking a brain worthy of educating, or similar representations of criminality and gang membership, which we'll discuss in a bit. So they discussed how these controlling images impacted their adolescence and how the institution of education often reinforced these ideologies. So this relates to a concept called the hidden curriculum, which refers to the other things you learn in school that are separate of the dominant curriculum. So, for example, when talking about hidden curriculum in schools, we'll often talk about how you learn to show up at a date and a time regularly, or how you learn in school to defer to authority figures, which socializes all of us to be good workers. But in the case of this research, the hidden curriculum includes modes of social control that reflect the dominant class's hegemony. And so part of that are those controlling images. They're one piece of the hidden curriculum that indoctrinate minority students with lessons of racial subordination. For instance, controlling images of Latino men as athletes curtailed participants' aspirations and diverted their academic focus to a focus on athletics. Younger and older men complained about the difficulty of shirking the expectations of gang membership. And this shows how the controlling image required a particular display of masculinity, and some young men were seduced by this controlling image by seeing it as cool. Another interesting finding is that Latino men were more constrained by controlling images when they were young than when they were adults, because young people are still learning how to navigate a racist society, so controlling images affect how people see themselves, but they're particularly detrimental to youth. When it comes to emotional resistance, this involves an internal psychological feeling and attitude to push back against controlling images. And the resistance is centered on the struggle to recuperate self and group worth. Emotional resistance can also lead to behavioral resistance. Interestingly, the time period matters. As we often discuss in sociology, We're affected by the ideology of the time periods in which we live. Latino interviewees who were teens or young adults during the 1960s experienced the social movements of the 60s, and as a result, they developed lasting emotional strategies of resistance. We often think of the civil rights movement in the 60s, but there were other prominent movements as well, and groups focused on empowering different marginalized communities. For example, the Young Lords were formed in the late 60s and advocated for the rights of Latinos and promoted self-determination for the island of Puerto Rico. So being a young adult and forming your identity in a time period known for social resistance against the status quo affected those participants' interpretation, experiences, and resistance to controlling images in the media. So resistance does not stop with emotions. It can also convert into action as people age and their social power increases. Resistance in youth often involved participation in sports or fighting, while resistance in adults involved giving back to their communities. Encounters with controlling images inspired economically stable Latino men to contribute through leadership efforts that teach equality, cultivate civic improvement, and model paths of mobility. So these men are converting their frustration with the controlling images into resistance in the form of leadership in professional realms. So the emotions are still there to motivate their actions. Institutions and people that circulate controlling images about Latino men do so to constrain their opportunities, their self-images, and ultimately their futures. Controlling images organize experience, channel emotions, and shape expectations and aspirations. Controlling images are a tool of systemic racism throughout the life course, yet resistance occurs to these controlling images. Life course stage also shaped anti-racist strategies as adults have more social power than youth and resist in different ways. So the authors conclude by arguing that by investigating the reactions to racialized depictions, we can give agency to the oppressed and showcase the process of social change.